So that was my first attempt at recording the piece. Now, I cheated slightly. I was supposed to do this a week after starting, which would have been Sunday, and I've actually done it just 2 days later. The reason for that is just, well, I guess to be expected, the vagaries of modern schedule and all. But it was a useful exercise, and it did exactly what I had anticipated, in that it highlighted a few areas which I didn't know as well as I thought. It also worked exactly as expected, in that the areas that were a bit messy or shakier than when I recorded it now, were actually easier ones, or ones that I hadn't been as concerned about up front. That makes sense, because I had focused very much on learning the notes of the more difficult bits, which I'd highlighted at the beginning. What was good to know, though, is that within just over a week, those actually came off a lot better than expected, particularly some of the more difficult runs and things like that, for the most part. Whereas there were bits that were really simple that I haven't actually really bothered learning even separately, because I can sight read them, that were shakier. And that's not a bad thing at all, because now I know to go back to those and to give them a little bit more attention. And I don't think they're going to take that long to work. And it obviously made sense, given that there was a bit of a challenge to doing this piece so quickly, or learning the notes quickly. It obviously made sense to focus on the most difficult bits first. And I think that's worked well. And now this exercise was there to just highlight things that were overlooked. So I'm not discouraged by that. In fact, that's exactly what was intended. What I can say, what is slightly annoying or discouraging, is that there are bits where I was sloppy in learning the notes, even with my attempts to be so focused in this exercise. And those bits, I've had to correct things, and they show up because I'm shaky and lack confidence in those parts, and it's just frustrating how much time was wasted on those. The other thing that was a bit odd is that one bit which it's the run, the 35 tuplet, if you can call it that, in bar 59. Now, I know that's difficult, and it's taken me a bit of a while to learn this. It was weird is that actually up until recently, because I focused so much on it, I had that going very nicely, and now it seems to have gone backwards. So I'm going to have to unpack that and figure out what's gone wrong there. So what I'm going to do now is just work through my feedback of or on this recording and have a look at how I'm going to work on taking it to the next level. My next milestone that I'm working towards is a lesson. And so I'd obviously like to polish the obvious things so that hopefully in the lesson I can focus on things that I'm not aware of. Yeah, I guess just refining it further and taking it even a step higher with the view to then performing it a few days later. So I'm not going to work through the nocturne and have a look at the areas where I feel in the recording there could be some improvement. Now, some of it, because it's a quick study, a lot of it's just going to be fairly obvious. It's going to be learning notes a bit better. Some of it will be in places that I'm already aware of that just need continued work. And others will be a few new places where things were a bit shakier than I would have liked. But also some of it is musical too, because the emphasis very much, because of the timescale, was on learning the notes quite quickly, and that's obviously been my focus and getting some of the technical stuff right. But at the end of the day, I'm doing this to make music, and I think there were quite a few things that I would really like to improve as early on as possible in terms of my interpretation and how I'm presenting the piece. So I'm going to talk about a few techniques that I'm going to use in doing this, and I'm not going to go through every area. There's actually quite a bit to work on from that recording, but I'm just going to look at a few of the a few places that come to mind. So first, starting with the opening. Now, I didn't quite like my voicing there, and I think because the opening is also relatively easy compared to other bits, it's a bit underlooked. So the things I'm going to focus on. And what I'm going to do is I'm just going to use what Graham Fitch calls the feedback loop. I'm going to listen to myself play and assess it and then feed that back into another repetition. Now, one of the things that I think needs to be done better, the tops need to be voiced more in this bit, and the articulation needs to be more precise. So I'll give you an example. I'm just going to give it a shot now and show you how this would work. So that's not terrible, but there were a few issues. The note lengths were not quite as consistent as I would like, and also there's actually a problem with the pedaling. I've realized that what I'm doing is I'm trying to do legato pedaling, but then also pedal the rests to give it that definition. So I'm going to need to practice the pedaling a bit. And I know there's a bit here, so it's pedal down, up, change again. So I can work on that a bit more. And then I would feed that in and try another repetition and see if I get it right. Now, I probably need to practice it a bit more because I think there was actually a bit of a coordination issue there with my pedaling. But let me try and see what happens. That was actually a bit better, but still needs a bit of work. Moving along, the main melody is fine. Well, when the main theme comes in, that's all fine. I think there were a few places where I need to breathe more. So I'd do a similar thing where I'd play and assess whether what I did was up to standard or what I wanted. And this seemed to be okay. But interestingly, I did actually learn this incorrectly in the beginning when I was doing my first read-throughs. And what I didn't notice is that there's these triplets and then a duplet. And I did the duplet as triplets. So basically what happened was I ended up on the bottom A too soon and I had to repeat it. And it's amazing that I only probably did that 2 or 3 times. when I was sort of getting carried away just because it's such a beautiful spot, that I'd actually end up learning that. It only took 2 or 3 repetitions of the wrong note to learn the wrong note. I still think, I know that the brain doesn't really distinguish between what's right and wrong, but I have this theory that the incorrect repetitions are more likely to be learned than the correct ones. That might be a bit cynical, but that's just what I seem to observe. The other thing that I realized is I could have made more of that musically. It's crescendo con forza, so it's the highest point in the piece. So something I would do is practice this and practice just being aware of that I want that to be a bit more dramatic there. So let me see if I can do that. Okay, so it was a bit out in terms of coordination there. But what I want to do is just before set it up by maybe taking a bit more time. I also have to practice landing on the A with the left hand, because the left hand comes back in exactly the same, this motive comes back in exactly the same way, but then goes into, instead of going, it goes in the return of the A section later. So I just need to be a bit aware of that. I think I've been practicing the second A section a bit more, which is why I might be a bit stuck there. Then, one of the places which is a pretty obvious one, but it was somewhere where things fell apart a bit. It's not difficult, but it's basically moving from the A into the B section, which goes like this. You can see I've split those left-hand notes. So I'm going to need to practice that a bit. Now that's not difficult there, it's just something that I haven't actually practiced properly. And there's always that, it's great to practice a piece and break it up into sections, but you do need to practice one section going into another, otherwise you make that mistake of just getting stuck in the transitions when you're performing. So let me try that. So what I would do there is probably break it down a little bit, and I need to make sure that I can get that left hand. Oh. And my fingering is 5/3. So I don't actually know that there. Now what I would do to get that right is keep on practicing it like that without going on, and then go back a bit further, and maybe on a bit further. The same thing happened in the transition when it goes, I think I missed those left-hand notes there, so I'm going to practice the same thing, and it's actually quite a good point to pick up here because this is quite tricky. It's in the middle of a phrase. And I might actually practice that right hand a bit separately as well. I could do things like tapping to make sure I know it a bit better. That's a place that I'd also sight read. I hadn't learned that separately or in any structured way. Then, moving on a bit in the B section, where we get this sort of, I think it's this Polonaise style rhythm in the left hand. I need to practice that a bit more. What I realized, I don't quite know exactly what comes where, and I forgot that I think I slipped up there a bit. And also making sure practicing it with the right hand when the right hand comes in. So, and I like that second one there. I think is a sort of just a little echo in the distance. I quite like that. I don't think I made a mess of it, but the transition into that Adagio section, bar 45, I'm I'm going to need to make sure I learn and know the notes there, because I'm going to have to look at my hands. I think I also learned that with some extra notes there. So once again, brilliant. Could have saved myself a lot of time and effort just by concentrating from the start. Now, the return of the A section, it's pretty similar, except as I mentioned in the earlier, there's a change in terms of the melody after this, the run in bar 49. So it goes. Now that, so I would practice that, and I think what I would do is actually practice those back to back so that I'm absolutely aware of how they are similar and how they're different from each other. The other thing that is a bit messy is partially because my hands are absolutely freezing. I still haven't quite figured out how to work the heating here properly, and I'm a bit hesitant to fry the piano as well. But in bar 50, 51, 52, this trill. I'm going to have to practice that, and I'll practice it separately. And then also with the left hand in time. Yeah, that I'd need to work on. There's also, at the end of that bar, I'd learnt a wrong note. I need to go to an A natural. I'd have to practice that. Interestingly, the run in bar 53, there's actually went quite a bit better than expected, but I rushed and I think botched the next bit. I think it needs to have more intensity there. It's marked appassionato, so I mean that's pretty obvious. It needs to have more intensity there. And then I did quite like. I think it's sometimes quite good to tell yourself when you've done something that you like. I did quite like this. That was being sort of quite a poignant, more subdued voice. I quite like that. And then these. Interestingly, this fast one, the 35, weirdly, I messed up the ascent, and the descent I think was all right. And in practicing, it was the other way around. I was fine with the ascent and struggled with the descent. I know that that's a bit of a difficult spot, so I just need to work on that a bit more. And the ways that I'm going to work on it are, firstly, I'll do it separately. And it's important to think something that fast, you need to think of it in groups. So although initially it's quite useful to do it in rhythms or something like this. And then you could do sort of, but I would speed it up with bigger groupings. So. And you don't really want to be thinking of each note. You want to think of it almost like that. Wherever thumb goes under or finger goes over is obviously usually a tricky bit. So I would then also practice something like this. And like that. Then putting it together with the left hand, it helps to, even though there is a bit of a free feeling with this, it does help to know which notes should more or less coincide. I do this in a group of, I think, 9998. So it will be... so I would practice that. And there we go. Now that is a bit that I know it just needs more time, so I'm not too. It's best not to get too daunted about it now. It's just something that I'm just going to have to keep on practicing. So I'm going to I'll probably keep that as a spot that I'll quarantine and work on, and then there'll be a few others that I'll continue just to drill and make sure that I know and that I don't lose them. But thankfully, I think quite a few of the tricky ones I don't actually have to work on too much, and then there's just a few new ones. So that's basically where I'm at, what I'm going to do next. And Along with all of this, though, I think I'm going to start, because I don't have to worry as much about the notes now, or at least I hope not. I can start thinking much more about the music, and it helps to do that as soon as possible, rather than to just learn notes in isolation of music making. And so I think I'm going to be much more aware of that, and I'm going to be looking out for how I want this to sound for the purposes of my lesson.